4, 3, 2, and 1, ladies and gentlemen, episode 38 of the Art of Move podcast with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar. We're out here in the Canadian Rockies, still trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement and biomechanics. Today is going to be just a kind of off the cuff episode. We signed on today and said, hey, what do you want to talk about? Neither of us really kind of had a specific topic planned. We have some really cool guests coming up next week. We have Stillness Academy and One of a Kind Fitness coming on Monday to debate the spinal engine. And we're going to talk a little bit about spinal mechanics and how you should train, some sort of locomotive relevant aspects of spinal movement today. But we have them coming on Monday. Next Thursday, we have Go to BAM. So a Go to coach and one of the kind of maestros behind all of the great content and the video work of Go to movement is going to be coming on to talk about life, Go to, and philosophy. Just, kind of more of a casual conversation as opposed to a technical one. I invited him onto a podcast recently to be part of the debate. And he's like, nah, dude, I'm a mover. I don't read books. I just move. So we're going to talk about just movement and less about like technical details about biomechanics with him, and maybe talk about how he approaches coaching Goda as well. And yeah, today we're just going to kind of go a little off the cuff. If there's anyone who signs on to nofilter.net and is watching this live, feel free to ask questions as we go. I know you've been thinking a lot about spinal engine because that sort of comments back and forth with One of a Kind Fitness and Stillness Academy kind of got us thinking a lot about the spinal engine. But what have you been thinking about the last couple of days?
Well, I've been thinking about that, and I mean, I'm pretty sure it was 2 nights ago that that comment came in where we were discussing the spinal engine. We'll get into it on Monday, but I did see a Goda video, and it was Coach Ricky, and I usually 99% of what he's saying, I'm like, oh, I like that, right? But this time he was talking about not really focusing on the spinal engine, which actually I agree with. Right off the get-go, for a regular trainer, a regular athlete, you don't really need to know about it. And it's not the first thing I would teach a beginner. I just wouldn't go there, right?
Right.
But to hit the next level, I would definitely cue the spine, and I would definitely work with harnessing the fascial recoils of the spine, if you want to call that spinal engine. I should say spine and pelvis, and use your head as a way to balance your body. Okay, so in boxing, I do that. I move laterally, and I know where my head is at any point. To me, that's harnessing the fascial recoils and the timing I need to whip myself in another direction. So for the next level of movement to be able to be 360, you need to know how to harness that. And whatever you want to call it, spinal engine. I know there's a little bit of a beef with the terminology. The spinal engine is pelvis, spine, head, even, right? And the fascial recoils that happen between the rib cage and the pelvis, right? So it is about positions. It is about recoils. It is about being head over foot in balance. And for most people, they don't need to get into super technical detail with it. So
right.
On one end, I agreed with Ricky. On the other end, I'm like, well, on the next level of it, you do need to learn it.
Yeah, I tried pulling it up, but I can't actually. It's embedded in Instagram, so I can't share it the same way I can share YouTube videos on No Filter. But one of the things, I've thought about that a lot, because when you're doing Goda and you're doing a drop in, for example, you're setting a bow, there is a little bit of a lateral, like it's a minor lateral bend in the spine that happens, right? Like if you set the bow properly, your spine will wave from side to side if you're going from bow corner from side to side. So the spinal engine kind of takes care of itself. If you're back chain dominant, you get that decompression, you start to have that spinal length, you start to increase your spinal mobility the more that you're doing this drop-in work. If you're doing crawls and you're waving your spine to, bow and corner in the crawling position, crawling especially emulates a sort of spine dominant locomotive action, because you have opposite arms and legs moving forward at the same time, which naturally compresses and extends your spine in opposite directions. And you can really, I played with I just did like a half hour, like 45-minute movement practice before we signed on, and I was playing with some crawling, and I was really trying to see, it's like, can I make it like use of this elastic recoil when I'm crawling? And I could, like, I was trying to like crawl from one end of my house to the other as fast as I could. without, trying to drive through my limbs. And I did find that the more that I was waving my spine, the faster I was able to go with less fatigue, right? And that's just efficiency of movement. But I think the question is, how much direct work do you have to, when a lot of people think of spinal engine, I mean, the wording, like you said, the wording can kind of confuse people, because an engine is like a core originator of movement, and you're not like necessarily starting, like, I don't think you start your movement necessarily just from the spine. There's all kinds of different things that happen simultaneously to initiate movement in the limbs, in the pelvis, in the shoulders, and through the spine. I think when you reduce, and we're going to talk about all this. We're going to debate this with One of a Kind Fitness and Stillness Academy on Monday. We're going to get really, really in depth. But I think my own position that I'm kind of in is the term spinal engine is just, it's a word, and it's almost like a misnomer, because it assumes that the spine is the isolated driver of movement, where even Serge Grakovetsky talks about the pelvic complex being part of it. It's the relationship between the shoulder, spine, and pelvis, and the counter rotations that happen therein, all the different connective tissues that account for that. I think there is no one part of your body. This is the whole like reductionist breaking down the body into different parts mentality that a lot of people kind of fall into. It's like, you have back day, chest day, leg day. It's like the whole, like, we've talked about this in many of our other episodes, that movement, and locomotive movement in particular, is a synergy of multiple things happening at once. There is no single origin. The, the you know the the it it's greater than the sum of its parts. Movement is greater than the sum of its parts. So you can't just say it's like it's just the spine, or it's originating from the drive in antagonistic muscles creating elastic recoil. Like, you can't say that it's just one thing.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. A few things come to mind. What level are we debating here? And I'm not talking about Monday's debate. I'm talking about, is it brace the core versus spinal engine? To me, that's the primary debate that needs to happen amongst the fitness industry, right? Where is your spine contributing to the movement even, right? Because the spine being a passive column means that you can brace the core and keep it centered. That's what you're supposed to do in a cue. However, and I don't cue that. I cue the movement of the head matching the step, right? So that doesn't mean a huge lateral bend. It just means matching what your foot is doing, right?
Mm.
Then when you're going three-dimensional movements and complex movement, it becomes a lot more important to harness which way the fascia is going, and to harness the control of the spine. Okay, so if you want to hit the next level, you really have to do that, in my opinion.
So when you're
However, the
saying,
primary,
hold on, I'm gonna slow you down for a second, because control of the
sure,
spine means different things to different people, right? Like,
yeah,
like, control of the spine in movement is going to be different than control of the spine the way that, say, an FRC practitioner would focus on individual segmentation. Their argument would be like, you shouldn't be trying to control your spine in fast movement if you can't control it slow. You don't attempt to do fast what you can't do slow. I don't necessarily agree with that. I don't think that's a
no.
universal. But when you say you need greater control of your spine, is it adequate to practice specific patterns and movements that are relevant to your sport that you need better spinal control in? Or would you know, not isolate the spine, but do specific work on your spine to, mobilize and control it better?
Well, I can tell you exactly what I do with my spine, and that's as a daily practice of just um, keeping it healthy. Okay, keeping it generally healthy. I move each part of my spine like a functional range conditioning practitioner. Well, I'll take the pelvis, I'll just rotate it in different planes of motion, just standing still, right? Takes 30 seconds. Same thing with
Hmm.
my thoracic spine, same thing with my cervical spine. This is just a baseline. I think of it like brushing my teeth, right? So if I'm in one position, I'll move my pelvis for 30 seconds. That's
Hmm.
the very, very baseline, and that's what I would get any person to do, right? But that's about as far as the FRC stuff applies for me personally. However, it's huge for a lot of my patients because they have zero control of it. But back to what I do. Um, Yeah, so I move the pelvis, I move the T-spine, I move the cervical spine, and then in actual motion, it acts together. Like you can't isolate them when you're actually moving.
Mm,
Okay, so you have to treat it like an elastic recoil, and you have to time that recoil out to your balance point. And your balance point is when your head hits your foot. This is talking three-dimensional movements now. If you watch my Instagram, how I cut and move, it's literally that. I time out like there's a laser coming from my foot. And as soon as my head hits that point, I have a movement.
mm,
Okay. At the exact split moment. So to me, that's harnessing the spinal engine in a three-dimensional capacity. Again, the spinal engine being the pelvis and the spine. Here's the thing though, the terminology, the word spinal engine, it does bring into the brain that the spine is doing the work, right?
mhm.
However, I didn't name it. Grekovetsky did, right?
Yeah.
So like I can't just change his theory, right? So and I understand when you instead of saying the spinal engine like it's a theory, you just start saying spinal engine. And
Mm.
then, most people will just be like the spine's the engine, right? So there is a little bit of language barrier there. You really have to get into the weeds of it.
Mm.
And yeah, that's pretty much what I got to say about that.
Yeah, and it's I'm looking forward to Monday's discussion too because one of a kind fitness's comment was that he's asserting that the spine is actually the primary driver of movement and that the limbs kind of follow the movement of the spine. So it's almost like a center out approach of the origins of locomotive movement. So I'm kind of curious to see why he thinks that and what kind of if he's going to bring some conversation on that point. When you're talking about my own spinal practice, I started doing less rigid spine work because again, I saw Ido Portal doing a lot of spinal waving and spinal undulation. I started doing lizard crawls because a lot of the crawling on the ground stuff was, I saw Ido Portal doing it, so I wanted to do it. Right, that was me. And then as I went further into gymnastics, it was a lot of J curls, so a lot of individual segmentation of flexion and extension, and trying to individually articulate. I found that was kind of useful. That made my back feel pretty good after years of just like axial compression through squats and deadlifts alone. So that felt really good. But this sort of rotary motion through the spine is not something that I've really trained directly before the last 6 months, right? I'd say probably even in the last 4 months since you taught me roping and since I started practicing some of this movement when I got into running, I'm finding that, that lateral, bouncing the head over the foot and that counter rotation at the shoulders and hips. I practice that while I run. I don't necessarily do that other than maybe if I'm doing rope flow or I'm doing drills and I'm just moving around, I'm doing like part of my movement practice. I use running as a way to train my spinal engine, and it really is just trying to get that undulation between the shoulders and the hips while landing my head over my foot and loading a bow. Like that's for me, like I use running as a way to work the spinal engine, and I don't do direct spinal engine work other than maybe a little bit of roping. I'll use roping as a warm up to go for a run because I pattern that counter rotation, that movement, and then it's familiar for me when I start, putting it into motion and I start running, at like a 6 mile per hour pace. I can still maintain that rhythm, but I don't do direct work for the spinal engine necessarily. I will do direct work to mobilize fascia, and I'll do myofascial release, and I'll like there are still, there's so much tightness through my whole upper body that inhibits the mobility of my spine. I mean, like I said, I powerlifted for years. You can go back and listen to the episodes where we talked about our training history, but I'm still really bound up. You've been kind of more in the natural movement world for maybe a couple years longer than I have. Realistically, I've still been, I was still doing lifting and CrossFit and, still squatting, close to 400 pounds or more up to, a little more than a year ago.
Yeah, like so the first step, there's levels to this, right? The first step really is recognizing that you can move you out of the that rigid core, right? So forget about the terminology spinal engine or whatnot. For the person, it's like, are you allowing your spine to move from side to side? That doesn't take a lot of cueing in that when you're teaching it, like let's say as a go-to practitioner, what Coach Ricky's argument was that you don't really need to even think about it. That's absolutely true. If you just let your spine do its motion, and that's it. That's for most people, that will be completely fine. However, like how I work it, and my favorite thing to do is do lateral motions like I'm slipping in boxing. And when you're doing that, you're getting into the bow really fast, and that whips the top of your body over as well. So I
Mm.
have to control the top of my body with that elastic recoil that my ribs have, and I sink it into the bow. And I can use that to propel a punch, or I can use it to propel a movement. Mike Tyson does this really well on like when he dodges and he goes in for the hook, right?
Mm.
That's really what he's doing. I posted a Cody Garbrandt doing it the other day on my Insta stories. Um, any good fighter is going to do it. And that's really harnessing the spinal engine and lateral motion using a boxing application. The first time I came across spinal engine, my core was super rigid. It was David Weck, and he's
Mm.
just like head over foot. And that's all I needed. And to try it out a few times, and it immediately felt way, way more intuitive and way better. And I was able to harness, like when you side bend, and I don't know if I completely agree with Weck's how much he side bends, but you can use the side bend as a way to recoil and have your head beyond your foot. Okay. So like again, we're talking next level here. I wouldn't teach a beginner this, but I can use that and step and harness that elasticity to propel myself the other way.
Mm.
Kind of like the same way in boxing when I land in the bow. Okay. So I can
Yeah. I mean, so
I can do it when I run, right?
yeah. And I find that cue head over foot for one of the things that I think is limited with it. It's like obviously it'd be nice if you can just laterally bend and you can intuitively understand that you're pulling into the hips, you're bowing into the hips, and your head lands over your foot because there's that slight lateral bend. But some people with really rigid cores who aren't used to any lateral bending can shift their hips to the side to stack. Like you might have a really rigid core and not understand that head over foot comes from a slight lateral bend and a slight rotation in from the like you might not drop your shoulder a little bit to get that bend as you're bowing into the side, right? Like you can misinterpret the cue head over foot. So even just like cueing people a little bit of a like that's why I found the roping so helpful was it cued that figure eight pattern that happens at the shoulders and at the hip. Like obviously it happens at the hips as well. It's a counter rotating um uh, pattern that coordinates with each other, but that sort of figure eight pattern is hard to kind of pick up on if your core is rigid and you're just laterally shifting your hips from side to side and you're still keeping like if you've done a ton of anti-rotation training and a ton of stiff core rigidity training, core stability training, and like you might just be like taking that head over foot cue and doing lateral hip shifting.
Yeah, it's not going to be smooth until you let that part of your body go, right?
Mm.
Like actually allowing that thoracic spine to be a gyroscope, that's when the figure eights become smooth, right? And it does take a lot. Like I was rigid for 10, 15 years, right? And it doesn't just let go right away. And it's becoming smoother and smoother. I'm getting, different feels in there where I'm using it in a run and I can harness it in different ways. Um I got a lot. There was like the 80-20 thing. As soon as I hit that head over foot cue from Weck, that was
Mm.
where it was 80-20. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be fun again. Like running became fun again when I did that because you're using the elastic recoils and then you can play with that. Right. So um another thing that you mentioned in a criticism of Weck would be when you side bend a lot, you tend to bring your hip forward. So you're
Mm.
working that like front chain dominant position in the side bend. Like, and that's the criticism of the like a lot of people have of the coil that he does.
Mm.
So I learned side bend with the coil, with Wex Royal Coil, which is where you pack your lat down on the same side that you're bending. So you get this lower lat firing. And that's could be a driver of movement, right? I played with that for years because Weck was always like the lats or the driver or the feet of the upper body, basically, right?
Mm.
That may not be the perfect quote, but that was basically it. And you can really feel that, right? Like when you're running and you're feeling that lat, like it's not exactly tight. You're using it in like a wave. If you ever
Mm,
watch Naudi Aguilar's slow motion and you see like a wave go through his body because his fascia's loose but transferring energy.
mhm.
So that's what I'm feeling in the lats as I go, or trying to feel. Okay. But the problem was when I was practicing it, I was going front chain, and I definitely was doing that. So it can be improved by really pushing back in your hip. That's the WEC side bend. However, is that even the best way to do it? I replaced it with the bow personally, right? So that's just a little insight on the training history of the side bend.
Yeah. I mean, I never actually trained the side bend at all. The closest thing that I got was when I was doing the ATG system. Ben Patrick had a couple of YouTube videos about doing side bend and lateral work, and I was like, okay, I'll try that, and I threw it in every couple sessions, but it wasn't even programmed into the prescriptive programs that I was doing, right? So I didn't have any experience with the side bend necessarily. Even doing the ropes was kind of the first introduction. And like I mentioned it last episode, like my fascia is so tight that when I laterally bend, it pushes air out of my lungs. Like if I just that's not me breathing, that's me pumping air just through a lateral bend. It's really, really weird. And I'm still trying to undo that. But that's like from so much lat packing, from deadlifts and front lever work, and so much compressive front chain work. It just literally pumps air out of my system when I laterally bend.
Yeah, that's that's wild actually. Your ribs must be super compressed. Mine
Yeah.
were for the longest time, and that's still an area of my body that needs a lot of work because for so long the ribs are compressed. It's hard to transfer energy efficiently and correctly through that area when everything's bound up and tight, right? So that does take a little while to unwind. It is a good idea to do myofascial work in that area. I literally cup my ribs with giant cups, high
Mm,
power, and I do stretching maneuvers, right? Or just I shouldn't say stretching. I usually reach and just feel the end range. It's kind of like FRC work in the end range,
mm,
and then I'll go for a run, right? Like I don't go too crazy with the FRC stuff, meaning the isolated movements in each part. I use it
mm.
more for just feel, and then I'll go and do an actual movement.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same at this point. I don't do a ton of I don't do it like can picture myself. I was contemplating adding in a lot more loaded end range stuff just to play with, and see if I could optimize a little bit more of my resting posture. So I wanted to do some loaded quad stretches again so that I could get my says. It does require me to go into my front chain quite a bit, but a lot of the flexibility work that I learned from Lucas Aaron is still incredibly relevant to me, and I'm probably going to end up. And once my shoulder's a little bit better, I want to do a little bit more of it and throw it in and see if I can incorporate some of the principles that I've started learning from Goda while also training loaded flexibility and loaded stuff. And also just as a test to see how it affects my running biomechanics. I mean, my running biomechanics have gotten a lot better. I've gotten some really good feedback from even Goda coaches who have watched some of my slow-mo video, and I fixed some pre-cornering issues that I had, and I fixed some like not being able to load my bow properly, and like even with my shoulder not being able to fully sling back in the run because of the surgery. Like I've even made progress on that, but I'm kind of curious. It's like, okay, what will doing some of this loaded flexibility work? Because I know a lot of it is done in these isolated planes. It's not necessarily done in three-dimensional movements, especially because it's static holds and stuff. It's like, is that going to transfer to three-dimensional movement? Is that going to affect my gait cycle? I'm really, I've always used myself as a guinea pig, but I'm more curious than anything.
It's interesting. It could I mean, those are open questions, right? Like you can look at the research. Research will say one thing, but in your body, who knows, right? Like it's good to experiment when you know this kind of like next level info. It's like go try it yourself. That's the way to do it, right?
Mhm.
So that's awesome. Yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to rewind a little bit back because you were talking about the spine when you're kind of moving from one place to another and you're taking advantage of that elastic recoil. In boxing, for example, you load that movement and you can either transfer it into unloading a punch or unloading into a different foot placement or anything. One of the things that you and I were talking about a while back, not on a podcast, you were showing me how you can lead movement with the head, right?
Mhm.
And I kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit about that and see how that fits into spinal engine. Because again, if you're initiating movement from the head as the sort of center point, and we're talking about the spine being the originator of the movement, how does that kind of tie in together?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm initiating movement with anything. Like I'm even with spine, I'm not like the spine's never isolated, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not initiating movement with my head, but what I am doing is purposely thinking of it as an internal cue for control. Because that to me is the easiest balance way to balance, basically at a high speed. So I think like literally there's lasers coming from my fourth and fifth metatarsal. And as soon as my head hits one of those lasers, I'm in balance. I can throw power. I only have to think of one cue and I can be ripping around really fast and then still do the maneuver, right? And then from there, it's putting on more and more complex footwork. That's just like a shadow boxing thing that I do that's really fun, right?
Mm.
But it also is harnessing that elasticity from the spine and using my head as a way to, I can accelerate it. I can decelerate it, although I don't really like to do that. I can use it as a whip. I can whip it forward fast and match my footwork so that it whips my body forward fast, right? So
Mm.
there's a lot of different things you can do, and it acts much like a figure eight itself. Okay, now
The
think it
head,
like
like your head
yeah,
movement does.
yeah, like in
Okay.
boxing, I can dip to one side and then duck my head under. Okay, and that's like the figure eight, and I can keep that motion going. You can kind of see it here, right?
Mhm.
And it's like a gyroscope as well. Like I can move my thoracic spine without moving my head, or I can move my head with my thoracic spine if I just take it with. Now, the way I see the head being the cue is that the head's like on top and it's whipping around and it's taking the spine with it, and the fascial recoils are happening every time the spine bends. Okay, so I'm just leading from the top, and that makes it like a pendulum. I hate the core pendulum theory name, but it is like a pendulum that's upside down, right?
Mhm.
And instead of the rope, when a pendulum swings, it's the ball's at the bottom,
Yep.
and the rope is pulling it. Instead of that, now we have an elastic. Same thing, like the spine with elastics on each side, and the head is like that pendulum.
Mm.
Okay, and I can use the elastic recoils at each side to propel myself in any direction. And then when you do it in three-dimensional motions, it's not just back and forth anymore. It becomes in any plane, in any cardinal plane.
Mm.
Then on the next level, if you match your feet with that, you can start playing with the cardinal planes and pretty much endlessly move. That's what I'm playing with right now. Um, pretty interesting stuff.
For those who don't know, what are the cardinal planes?
Okay, so it's like northwest, east, south, right? If
Mm.
I'm just standing there, let's pretend I'm facing the north. To the
Mhm.
back of me is the south, east, west. I can turn my body in any one of those planes, um, using momentum and using the way my feet are angled. Okay, and I can do it in a smooth way. Like I don't have to turn like a robot. It's like an instant turn, and once you start getting the flow, you can use the fascial recoils of your body to propel you in different planes. And it's like you're facing different directions quickly.
Mm.
Like it's almost like a ninja thing where you're fighting five guys at once from every direction.
Right.
But I'm just practicing the footwork at this point. I'm just getting it now, right? But the ropes led me to that because in the rope, if you're swinging the rope forward and you keep swinging the rope, but you turn your body, then you're swinging the rope in the opposite way. It goes clockwise to counterclockwise.
Mhm.
You've done nothing but turn your body, but the rope is now swinging the opposite direction. Okay, so that kind of taught me how to harness that, and then I found the footwork for it, and now I'm just playing with that.
That's cool. So it's kind of like being able to turn your whole center of gravity, rotate it smooth, and maintain your center of gravity and maintain your balance.
Yeah, like as long as your head is like between your feet, when you have 2 feet on the ground, okay, let's say boxing, 2 feet on the ground, your head can be between your feet. You're not going to be in balance when you lift a foot, but when at the exact moment that both feet are on the ground, you'll be in balance. Okay.
Mm.
But in order to be in balance as I move and I have one foot on the ground, my head has to be over that foot. So I'm matching
Right.
those and I'm matching footwork specific to moving in those cardinal planes. Now, and that's a very go to footwork. That's very like internal, using two bows at the same time, or sorry, using two corners at the same time, using two bows at the same time. I'm thinking corner, corner, bow, bow, corner, right? So um it's interesting. I'm playing with that right now, right? And I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, that'll be cool. You should make a video and post it on the Art of Move Instagram page.
I kind of did before. I was like when I was just playing with it. It's a
Mhm.
boxing video way back, and I'm just moving in different planes, but it kind of looks clunky to me now. And a person watching it
Right.
would probably be like, "What the hell is he doing?" But I think it's a lot smoother now, right? So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, and so when you're thinking of like other than boxing, real world applications, what scenario do you see someone using that transference of energy or that changing of directions in?
Any sport where you have to change direction, or any time you
Mm,
have to change direction, right? Like a running back, you'll see the upper body lag a little bit, right? Like in the motion, if he's planting really hard, you'll see a more of a bend than usual. It's not going to be like 22.5 to 22.5, or like, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be the person pushing as far hard as he can. Hopefully it's inside ankle bone high, like outside of your foot, right? And you can use the direction and the momentum of the upper body and the fascial recoils to propel you in a direction or help you move in that direction, right?
mm,
So you don't want to ever be working against yourself. That's the key. Now, again, we're talking, kind of next level with it. If you're just walking, I don't have to tell you how to move your spine. It's just like let it relax, and I would put other cues way higher than that. Okay, but
mm.
if I'm talking to a running back, or I'm talking to like somebody who has to cut and pivot, I want to teach them ninja level head over foot, ninja level, the pendulum I was talking about before, how to harness the recoils, not just get range of motion, not just like sit on a bench and let your ribs elongate, although that might be like something I do for 30 seconds or a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like it's really about harnessing recoils, balance, momentum, and footwork.
Mm. It's funny because I can picture myself doing something like, being on a bench with a foam roller to extend my ribs out just because I'm so compressed in that way that, getting to a baseline. Basically the way that I started looking at flexibility and end range training and all this stuff is to, if you've done a bunch of damage to your posture either from sitting all day or from lifting or from patterning improper patterns, and you have these maybe like tissue adhesions from repetitive behaviors, that you can use that as a prescriptive tool as opposed to like the actual core of your movement practice. Like I used to use end range training and flexibility and stretching as my movement practice itself, and now it's kind of like, okay, here's a problem, here's a tool in my toolbox that I can use to get back to a baseline. But once I'm at that baseline, I want my practice to be oriented around actual movement through space. I don't want to stay in a place where I'm spending you know 90 seconds to 2 minutes in a stretch, or I don't want to be doing a ton of just like foam rolling or end range conditioning work all the time as what I do, because first of all, that's boring to have to do and maintain all the time. It's like the point of it is just to do it. It becomes its own point eventually. And while I enjoy training, while I enjoy making progress, I think the prescriptive approach where it's like, here's a problem that is inhibiting your movement and making you less efficient. You can use this tool, but keep practicing the movement as you improve your range, as you decrease those adhesions.
I think that's a great way to look at it. Like adding in um, uh, prescriptive movement, or like let's say foam rolling, or not foam rolling, but rolling in general, myofascial
Mm,
release, certain end range strength work. Yeah, why not? Right? That's a great way to put it. Shouldn't It's not movement itself. That's the thing, right? Like if you want to be better at moving through space, eventually it's got to get to that, right? So I see a lot of the Instagram, trainers. They're all in the gym. Like it's always equipment, and when does it ever get away from the equipment? A lot of times it's okay, we've maximized what we can do in the gym, and now go to your trainer in your specialized sport, right?
mm.
But for the average person, they don't have that. Eventually, like I think movement should be higher priority versus going to the gym, right? If you
Mm,
want to be better at movement, you have to do movement
you have to
itself. It
move.
has to get there. Yeah, even with the FRC stuff, it's the same thing, right? Like, um, I saw a post by Andrino Spina today, and it's just like you want to master the control. The control. It's like, how much control do you need in a static way? How much do you need to be able to
Yeah.
move your hip? Like, you know how they do in FRC where they're just like moving, they're on the ground in that 90-90 position. They're just lifting their hips like 2 inches.
Mm.
It's like, that's sweet for a little bit, right? Like a couple minutes, just feeling out the muscles, feeling them turn on. But when are you actually moving? Like, where's the movement?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, are you
Yeah.
gonna spend an hour doing that just to improve your end range mobility? Like, again, if you have a major issue that requires you to, heal a joint, or like I'm doing a lot more controlled articular rotations with my shoulder right now, just because that blood flow in the joint while I'm trying to heal the surgery. I'm 2 months in. I was told a 4 month recovery, right, before I can do harder stuff. But like even with that, it's like I'll spend maximum 10-15 minutes doing it, and then maybe a half hour every couple of days of doing like actual strength work for it to strengthen it. But the rest is just like I'm just moving. Like I'm still working those figure eight patterns. I'm still working the elastic recoil in my run. I'm still I'm like, my goal right now is to get to a point where I can hang from a bar and have an easy overhead reach position, maybe better scapular tracking, because because my lats are so locked up still. um but I don't want to spend an hour just like slowly against a wall trying to like rotate my arm and like shaking and creating as much irradiation as possible, because when I go to move, I'm still irradiating and I'm still trying to get that, like, I don't know, like it doesn't translate too well for me. It works as
So
a tool for recovery.
what does the radiation mean to you?
Mm. So irradiation to me means to create tension, as much tension as possible, to increase nervous system output. So
So when's that happening in real life? Again,
it's
like,
when you're lifting a lot of weight, like that's about it.
yeah, and I get it, like, because the science says that when you create tension in your core, that you can move your limbs a little bit better. But you know what I mean? Like, I can isolate my glenohumeral joint, my shoulder, the ball in the socket, a little bit more according to science when my core is tight. Okay,
Mhm.
so I'm irradiating my whole body and I'm just transferring the energy to that point. But again, like, I want to transfer that into smooth motion at some point. I don't think they address that in FRC itself. They're like, okay, we're gonna make your shoulder a shoulder. The glenohumeral joint is gonna move to the max. Now you're able to do whatever you're doing better. You're gonna have a better template for it. Okay.
Mhm.
I mean, I buy that argument to a degree, and I do like. I think it's more valuable in people with pain or people
Mhm.
who've never even thought about doing it, even getting the awareness and the energy and the thought to be flowing to a certain area is going to help you. And
Yeah.
awareness is one of the biggest things, right? So in that way, it's great for people in pain and people who don't have great control of their body. But eventually, for like the next level, you have to get like you have to do the actual movements. You have to make them smooth. You have to make them coordinate, dance together. It's just that system doesn't seem complete to me for that
No,
application. Yeah.
again, it's very uh problem based prescriptive to me. And
Mhm.
that's ultimately, like you said, it's like, okay, maybe someone doesn't actually know how to activate certain parts, or like their nervous system is so turned off because they've been so inactive that they need to actually know how to engage just basic movement patterns, like literally patterns that are bare bone basic, without spending a ton of time just like slightly lifting their arm or something. I don't really know. Like, again, FRC has been useful for me in the context of lifting. It's been useful for me in the context of joint healing when I've had injuries. But it's boring. It's really, really boring. The
Well,
other the other instance where I could think of irradiation as being somewhat useful is I used it for flexibility. And so I was able to access certain end ranges. And when I was trying to actually gain passive flexibility as well, like the ability to relax in certain ranges, was I would create as much tension as possible and then actively let that go. And so I was able to teach my body to switch from tension to relaxation, which I think is a skill in itself. The issue is
Absolutely.
you still want to be able to sequence. I was listening to one of our old episodes, and you were talking about the sequencing of muscles firing properly as being like more important than the actual muscle firing, right? Like, so being able to transfer, like when you're taking a step, being able to transfer tension from that loading up the side of your leg, that bow oriented loading, and spiral that movement out is more important than being able to flex your glute actively and just create tension in your glute to propel you forward. Like that for me made a lot of sense. But even like most people don't know how to turn themselves off. Most people don't know how to let go of tension in their body, and I think like that's what I used irradiation for most recently, other than just like pure strength capacity, was creating tension and then releasing it so that my body knew how to relax.
That's a very good point, and I do play with tensions myself. I've been off of it a little bit lately, not because I don't believe in it. It's because I do so much experimenting that sometimes I just drop one thing and get to the other. I'll do 3 months of breathing, 3 months of eye work. It goes in seasons almost when you're doing so much. Okay, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very good point. You can use tension as a tool, right? So I don't know who said it. I think this guy Ken Wheeler on YouTube, love him. He's a
Mm,
physicist. Um, he was talking about pressure mediation being a big theme in like the universe. It pressure everything's about pressure mediation is like one of his general themes, right? And the I find that in the body as well. It's a series of tensions and compressions causing pressure. You got to figure out what's compressing, what's tensing. Um, the go-to stuff to me is really the shortcut to getting out of that compressive tension loop where you're constantly doing Kelly Starrett type stretches, mobility, bands to mediate the pressure that comes from what you're doing all day versus
mm,
just not getting the pressure in the first place, right? So in the office when I'm working with patients, I'm thinking pressure mediation. Where's the tension? How can I release the nervous system and the mechanical tension in this area that is bound up? Okay. I did see a post, and I tried not to bring up Monday's debate, but one of the things that was interesting was the CNS uh, activating muscles in the back. Now,
mm,
that
mhm,
absolutely does happen, right? Like, we're not even talking about spinal engine right now. We're talking about just mediation of the musculature in the back. So, to me, when you don't have proper fascial recoils, your muscles will closer to the spine will start tensing up. This is what I
mm,
observe. Okay. So, I see this with a lot of yoga people and a lot of hyper flexible people who come in. I'll feel flaccid muscle. I'll get close to the spine and it's like a rock.
mm,
And I'm like, this person has to slow themselves down using their musculature and control themselves using the musculature because the fascial recoils aren't closing the joints or helping mitigate the forces that happen when you're moving. Okay, so that's one of the major things that I see within pressure in hyperflaccid and people who can move a lot. Right, it's one of the
right.
issues that comes up with that.
So what kind of behaviors or scenarios would sort of condition your body to be in that state?
Stretching a lot or being naturally, if you're very very flexible, there's a good percentage of the population, maybe 5%, who's just insanely flexible from a young age, right?
Mm,
And you have certain like muscles and fascia close joints. So if you're a power lifter, your lats are coming down to your glutes and making that X shape at the thoracolumbar fascia, and it's pushing against your pelvis. It's actually closing those joints. Okay, so it's making you more stable at the cost of being able to, move very, very intricately. Okay, so
mm,
your joints are more stable. You are a more stable person. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have like the yogis who are like very, very uh, um, long, and they've made themselves into uh, like basically they can't close their joints with their fascia and their muscles anymore. So the intricate muscles closer to your spine have to tighten up. That's what I see, right? So for me, the solution to that is to uh, integrate the fascia back in, make it more elastic, get them to do more bounding work. So you actually change the fibers, right? easy bounding work and easy tension work, making them understand tension by just, simple cueing. Because even with yogis, a lot of them can't even feel their hamstrings. They're like, yeah, I'm going all the way down to the floor. I can put my head to the floor and nothing
Mhm.
is tensioning back there, right? You don't think at some point it's an issue? If it's an issue the other way, if everybody recognizes that insane amounts of tension will be an issue, but people don't recognize the other direction where no tension is
Hyperlaxity,
also an
yeah.
issue. Yeah, exactly,
Mhm.
right? So, yeah, that's just an observation there, right?
So we got a viewer comment here, and I wanted to kind of get your take on it too, because I had some thoughts. Efren was saying that he uses the treadmill with a slight incline to address the micro within the go to macro. This way, I address these things while actually moving. I'll support my upper body using the front or sides of the treadmill. It feels like pushing a sled. And so I've
Yeah.
done things where I'll put the treadmill at a same thing at a slight incline, or maybe not, maybe completely flat, and I'll go like I set it to a one. He just said a very slow on the treadmill, like a one or a two speed, and I'll set the treadmill to like even below a one sometimes, and do low walking drop ins and really like analyze my gait. One thing that I found was holding the front of the treadmill inhibited the movement of my shoulders a little bit. You still can, but I liked having the freedom to move my arms back and forth and not be locked into a stable, like maybe if I could turn the handles a little bit and I could actually get that same spinal undulation. But I found that for me personally, when I do walking drop-ins and do that really slow deliberate work, holding on to something, holding on to a stable surface inhibits my ability to actually wave my spine.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what he means exactly with the micro and the macro. Okay, because I have my own idea about that too. I feel that as well, but like everyone's gonna have their own internal cueing like that, and
Mhm.
I almost separate. Like there's times where I'm doing drop-ins where I'm just concentrating on my hip. There's times where I go for walks for an hour where I'm in the zone. I'm almost meditating with it, and I'm just focusing on certain parts doing things, so I can have that next level feel.
Mm.
And then sometimes I just take it for a ride, right? So there's many levels you can do with, go to drop-ins and just, go to in general.
Yeah.
All the checklists that I usually say. So it's interesting.
One of
Yeah,
the
man.
things that I started doing in terms of addressing the micro within the macro is the macro for me are just the universal principles, and then the micro is addressing how well you can execute on them. That's
Mm.
for me. That's my own practice. So I will take a slow motion video of myself running at the beginning of a session every time now. Like if I get a chance before I start training, if I have like an hour or so to train, the first 5-10 minutes is just like without any queuing or anything, just my natural run. Where am I at? Going from living my life and working on my computer all day to going for a run. I'll hop on the treadmill, run it flat. I'll put it at a 5.5 to a 6, and I'll just film myself in slow mo and I'll see where I'm at. Maybe I'm not setting my bow properly. Maybe my heel isn't turning away because I'm not cornering properly. Maybe maybe I don't have that same spinal movement and I'm not as coordinated in rote that the hip and shoulders, depending on where I'm at. And maybe I'm not back chain dominant enough either. Maybe like that's the reason I'm not setting the bow. Depending on where I'm at, I'll look at that, and that's how I'll design my session, and that's how I'll kind of measure my progress. It's like, this is my before. I'm going to go in for a half an hour to an hour, and then I'm going to do a half hour run. I'm going to film myself running, after I've done a half hour to 40 minutes of just working on the issue. Usually for me, it's actually setting a bow in motion. So what I'll do is I'll crank the shit out of my bow for like half an hour, and I'll really focus on setting the bow in a locomotive pattern. And I'll even do that treadmill walk before I start running. Is I'll just go really really slow, and I'll set the bow every step. And that's how I address the micro within the macro. The macro is just the universal principles: the back chain dominant head, stay in your columns. It's the universal principles of movement, right?
Yeah, like I like the way you put that actually, because that even fits into the fractal type of theory about it, right? So,
Mm.
the bow, you can go all the way down to size of position from the bow. I think somebody posted that. I can't remember who
Yeah.
posted it. Maybe the
Yeah. It was
body. No,
Dr.
no, no.
Brennan.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
He posted that,
Dr.
and
Brennan.
it's brilliant, right? It's fractals, and once you understand the fractals, it's just practice the fractal, right? So the practice the micro within the macro. It's
Hmm.
uh, it's brilliant, right? And I like what Efren said here, um, where he treats it like crawling, or some type of pattern like that within the shoulders. So I think Coach Carly posted something like that the other day on a treadmill where she's moving back and forth, and like I could tell you're feeling your shoulders as you're doing that. That's even, to me, again, the word spinal engine, that's working the spine like it's supposed to. It's not braced anymore. It's undulating back and forth. I
Mm.
especially feel the spinal movement when I'm crawling. Okay. So when
Yeah.
I'm doing I can't remember what the crawl names are. I don't even care, right? When my when my knees are off the floor and I'm feeling it. As long as I keep the principles, as long as I keep the macros, it's all just, to me now, it goes from micro to macro, right? Like
Yep.
fractals. So I'm crawling, and if I lead with the spine, it's a different feel than when I lead with my feet, right? Like I feel like I can propel myself and propel my arms better when I'm using my spine. Now I use that same motion for boxing. That's a lot of what the
Mm.
Soviet boxing is, the old style, not like American boxing, but you'll notice a lot of the really good guys like Lomachenko, a lot of guys from the East, use the style where it's almost like a step for every punch, and they use rotations, and it's a very different style, but it's much like crawling. It's the same type of energy that comes out, and you're using your spine, you're bending, you're twisting. Yeah, it's great stuff, right? There's applications for go to movement kind of like everywhere, and yeah, that's what I love about it. It's kind of endless, but
Well,
at the same
that's
time simple, right?
kind of why they're universal principles of movement, right? Like what Goda does, I think, in my observation, is that they just offer first like a different set of first principles. They're offering a different map. It's like here are the first principles of movement. This is what you got to do to get closer to good movement. Here are the standards, right? Like there the assertion that there is an actual right way to move, that the body was actually designed or evolved to move in a particular way. And it's like, here, look, you're going to be on a spectrum. The Goda is the good stuff, Woda is the bad stuff, and you're going to land on a spectrum depending on how well you apply these principles. You might exhibit, a handful of these universal principles, but not these ones. So you're maybe here on the spectrum, or maybe you're like a Goda 10, so you're like, wait, you're fully Goda, you're up on that part of the spectrum. It's just a grading scale for good, secure, safe, fluid movement.
It makes so much sense that you would take, like, when you start doing Goda and you're starting to think about different parts, you're like, okay, the ankle. Here's a picture of an ankle I don't want, and here's a prime ankle. Let's get my ankle
Yeah.
closer to the prime ankle. It's so simple. It's like um everything, like most of the systems I've seen are so complicated. I've dove into so many different systems, and it's always like you're getting a few nuggets, but it's never complete. And you kind of got to put everything together yourself, which I've done. And Goda was the first system, maybe WEC method as well, but Goda was the first system I ever went, wow, okay, they're onto something here. This is different. This is much
Mhm.
different. It's much more simple once you get it. It's just like, look like this, don't look like this. Here are exercises to get you there. Here's the proof with the video of like the best guys doing it. Let's debate that. Let's see what is actually the best way to move, and that's kind of where I want to go with, like, I wouldn't even call it a debate. Maybe it'll turn into a debate. I'm not sure on
Mm.
Monday. Four people on, by the way, is going to be
It'll
everyone's
be
going to be
interesting.
jumping.
M-
It'll be jumping the
My
gun.
my intention for Monday is not necessarily even to participate, but to kind of mediate and ask questions,
Yeah,
and I'll be the moderator, and that'll be my role, because I'm more interested in, we've talked
yeah,
for well over 45 hours now about these ideas. I kind of know where you and I stand
100%.
on it. And I might ask some questions that could clarify, and that's sort of my goal is to keep it civil. I know that one of a kind
Absolutely.
fitness, I just learned recently actually that one of a kind fitness has a little bit of beef with some Goda coaches, and there's
Yeah.
I just don't want people throwing shade. I just want it to be a conversation and some debate about ideas about biomechanics first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And one thing, it's even if somebody's incorrect about something, right? My ideas are just wild and incorrect, and you can get as mad as you want, but at least it's getting everybody thinking, right? It's like, what is the answer to this question? If I'm wrong, that's fine, but at least it's getting out there in the ether, right? Like it's out there and people are thinking about it, and it's good to have debates, right? Like the best ideas will, may not shine through during the debate. It rarely does, but people get to hear it in the public forum, right? So it's very interesting that way. And I'm less interested in defending Greg Kefsky, like the spinal engine, as
Mm,
I am in hearing their ideas, because they obviously both think about it quite a bit. Like
mhm.
if you're thinking about this all day and you're practicing movement yourself, you're going to have something valuable to say, right?
Yeah, of
So
course.
I'm sure we could all get value out of it, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool to have trainers on, because I mean I'm not coaching anyone in movement right now. You work as a therapist, right? You work as a chiropractor, so you see people more clinically to help get them out of pain. And then these guys, we both have training backgrounds. You owned a CrossFit gym. I was a personal trainer for 10 years, but um, the the angles that we'll be able to come at these ideas with, I think I kind of see myself more as a movement practitioner and someone who is just a voracious learner of ideas and concepts, right? Like I spent a lot of time thinking and studying and testing and thinking and studying and testing ad infinitum. And you too, you're probably one of the most deep thinkers that I've ever met. And you all the knowledge that you have about the body is applied in a practice, chiropractic practice and a movement
Appreciate
practice,
that.
right? So we're gonna have some really really cool angles on Monday. I think really really cool angles. um I got an email from someone a couple days ago where they actually had a request for a topic for an episode. And I just want to let anyone know, if anyone wants to hear a specific episode, please either send me an email to media@nofilter.net, or you can message me on Instagram at the art of move, or you can message Will. Well, actually, that's Will's Instagram. I'm at the body moves. So you can message me or Will. You can email me. You can jump on these live on nofilter.net, and you can request specific episode. We've had different guests come on at the request of, like, I've reached out to different people based on requests that I've gotten. And yeah, I mean, please continue to interact with us, because we're getting a lot of really cool ideas from you guys. The next episode that was requested was actually how to get started with Goda, like how to actually start from scratch if you've never done it. And I emailed this guy back. His name was Anthony, actually. It's the same name as me. But I emailed him back and said, "Hey, look, Will and I aren't actually Goda coaches, and we've had some Goda coaches on." And we have a Go to coach coming on next week, where we have Bam coming on next week. So that's going to be a cool question to ask him. It's like, hey, how do people get started with Goda? What I'd love to do is I'd love to talk more about our journey. Maybe next episode, next solo episode that we do, we can talk about our journey of how we started applying and learning these things, because both you and I went from a do it yourself perspective. This guy's email specifically said, hey, like a lot of the courses that they offer, a lot of the get going courses are really, really expensive, and you don't know what you get. And I can't necessarily afford to get a coach. How would you do it? And it's like, well, you know what? We aren't coaches, but we can at least talk about our personal experience, and we can ask the coaches what people would do. So we'll do an episode for you, Anthony, next time, and we'll cover that a little bit. But that being said, if anyone does have requests for episodes, please reach out.
Yeah, please do. We want to hear what you're thinking, and we've got some awesome feedback lately, and it's very inspiring to hear that you're listening, and we thank you for that. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
I'm absolutely humbled by the response that a lot of these episodes have gotten, and just built continuing to see that community grow on Instagram. And we're humbled. We're really really stoked and grateful. So in the future, we're going to be creating some of our own courses to release for we're working on a foundations course right now. So if you've been listening to this podcast and you love what we talk about and you kind of want a little more practical approach or a little codified or organized approach, probably by the end of the month we'll have our foundations course that kind of puts everything that we've talked about over almost 40 episodes of content in the podcast and put it into a systemized approach to movement, right? And so we'll be launching that by the end of the month. And if you want to kind of get into that, you can DM us, and maybe we'll do some early bird special or something. Not sure yet, but keep an eye out for that. But anyways, guys, we're going to wrap up for today. Thank you so much for listening to the guys who joined us live. Thanks for piping in, and thanks for the comments, Efren. It's always nice hearing from you. And yeah, we will catch you on Monday for our next episode. It's going to be 1:15 Mountain Standard Time on nofilter.net with One of a Kind Fitness and Stillness Academy to debate whether or not the spine is the primary driver of movement. And that'll be a really, really fun conversation. So we'll see you then.
Have a good one, guys. Let movement be your medicine.